Welcome back, traveller. Tonight we crack open the makeup kit of the Middle Ages, and wow, it bites back. You've heard the fairy tale version, soft veils, rosy cheeks, saintly glow, but the fine print hid tweezers at the hairline, lie on the skin, lead in the powder, and rules for how long your sleeves could dream. We're pulling the pin on medieval beauty standards, and watching vanity versus virtue wrestle in real time. Bathhouses versus blizzards, painted calm versus hunger, courtly appearance rules that could fine you for a ribbon. The payoff. You'll spot the quiet engineering behind effortless looks, and steal a few resilient tricks that still work when life isn't cute. Do me a solid tap like, and subscribe so this deep dive finds its tribe. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and what time it is right now. I want to see our little guild stretch across the map. Start here. You wake in a timbered room where the air smells of wood smoke, wool, and yesterday's bread, and you ask a deceptively modern question. What would make you lovely by medieval beauty standards? Not lip kits, not ring lights. Virtue on the face, rank in the hands, and weather on the skin. Pale cheeks whispered, you didn't toil in fields. A high forehead signalled learning. A small, calm mouth meant discipline. Church preached modesty. Poets praised radiance shot through with humility. Neighbours measured you with eyes trained by harvests and holy days. Beauty was not merely seen, it was read like a psalm in flesh. The morning routine felt practical before it felt glamorous. A basin is warmed, a linen cloth wrung till it sighs. Rose water or vinegar cuts the night's grease. Breadcrumbs or ground oatmeal make a mild scrub that smells faintly at breakfast. You smooth a dab of honey at the corners of your mouth to chase wind chap and whisper a prayer. The today's smoke will choose someone else's cloak. This is everyday grooming in the Middle Ages, small, repeatable acts inside houses that breathe drafty stories. If you've ever washed your face at a campsite with a bowl and resolve, you already know the vibe. Then comes the forehead, the era's headline. To lengthen it, some plucked the hairline back. Temples, baby hairs, sometimes even brows thinned to a scholarly quiet. It stung. A friend holds a candle. You grip the bench. The little roots argue their way, out one by one. Pain met patience in these painful beauty rituals, and humour often attended with a wink. Better 3 tears now than a lifetime of bangs. A high brow suggested a high mind. No diploma required, just the courage to evict your own hair. Paleness, though, is where image versus survival begins its tug of war. Sun feeds you with warmth and steals you with freckles. Frost keeps colour honest and makes noses mutiny. Veils, hoods, and wide-brimmed hats become portable shade. If winter and status conspire, you cheat with chalk, ground eggshell, or a paste of almond and milk, chasing that candlelit glow without advertising the recipe. The trick is restraint. Too much powder, and you look like a ghost who lost the argument with a miller. Just enough, and you read as rested, not rich. Cheeks and lips needed theatre, without scandal. A pinch for bloom works on young skin, but deserts the tired. Alkanet root steeped in oil paints, a shy rose that survives sermons, a dab of berry juice brightens a mouth as long as nobody catches you mid-application. Here, courtly appearance rules started murmuring, colour is fine if it looks like God gave it to you. Colour is sinful if it looks like you bought it from Agnes behind the bakehouse. Beauty played peekaboo with vanity versus virtue, and every village had an opinion. Eyes had their own grammar. A thin line of soot or coal along the lashes kept smoke from sting, and made irises look like polished river stones. Lashes touched with a slick of egg white held a curl, as stiff as a vow. Brows were ghosted, not shout. Herbal collyriums promised clarity. Saffron, fennel, rosewater. Some helpful, some hazardous, all offered in tones of certainty. When a tear slid during Mass, was it devotion or epilation fallout? Both could be true. The Isle didn't need to know. Hair was a sermon you wore. Maidens showed length braided like a rope of promises, wives veiled or wimpled, turning humility into an elegant silhouette. To lighten or gild, you could steep strands in chamomile or saffron, then sit where sun and gossip met. Harsher souls flirted with lye and ash, a whitening that bleached both hair and patience. Clean scalp was a daily negotiation. Louse combs, nitpicking by firelight, vinegar rinses, and the quiet solidarity of sisters who know what it means to keep a household tidy under a wool hood. Teeth and breath belong to your radius more than your portrait. Salt and sage powders scoured gently. A twig of hazel or licorice became a chew brush. Parsley after onions saved friendships. Wine or vinegar rinses lent courage to conversation, if not to enamel. Toothache lurked like a petty noble, too small to depose, too powerful to ignore, so cloves might nest in a hollow, and prayers covered the gaps between remedies. A bright smile wasn't about straightness. It was about not scaring the baker. Bathing wore many masks depending on city, class, and season. Communal bathhouses hummed in some regions. Steam, soaps of tallow and lye, herbs tossed in like small blessings, while elsewhere, fear of miasma and scandal kept tubs prudently rare. Many practiced clean by change. A fresh linen shift pulls sweat away, the body feels edited, and the day can proceed. Sachets of lavender, rosemary, or thyme hid in chests, smoke from juniper, washed garments, when water couldn't. Again, image versus survival negotiated in rooms lit by tallow and judgment. Hands told on you faster than a diary. Pale smooth hands said, indoor duties. Sun-browned knuckles said, honest work. Ink stains confessed literacy. Needle pricks told of evenings by the hearth. You might rub milk and honey into your palms, buff with bread or pumice, and hide soil under soft leather gloves on market day. Rings went merely ornaments. They were well-placed distractions, little suns that drew the eye away from the story. Your fingernails were trying to publish. Silhouette was strategy. A fitted kirtle, lace to support, a gown that skimmed rather than strangled, a belt that found the honest middle between feast and fast. Posture mattered as much as pigment. Shoulders soft, chin alive, but not proud. Steps that didn't comment on themselves. In courts, courtly appearance, rules, policed gesture, as much as colour. No clacking heels in the nave, no flying sleeves that baptize soup, no laughter that shows too many teeth. Elegance was applied behaviour, not just applied balm. Here's the principle to tuck in your sleeve. Medieval beauty wasn't foolishness. It was a survival language. A little blush could open a door. A clean veil could close a rumour. A steady brow could broker peace at market. And yet, every choice had a cost. Time, coin, comfort, sometimes blood. If you're ready, we'll open the travelling cosmetic box next, and I'll show you what people actually carried. Combs, pins, herbs, and a courage you can smell, so you can feel how a face held its ground when the road and the weather didn't care. Open the small chest and listen. It clicks like a secret, then exhales beeswax, dry herbs, and a whisper of smoke from last night's fire. Inside, you find a wooden comb polished by years of hands, iron pins wrapped in a scrap of linen, a tiny bronze mirror that tells the harsh truth at arm's length, and a pouch of ground oatmeal that smells faintly of breakfast. This is your toolkit for everyday grooming in the Middle Ages. Humble, sturdy, and blessedly portable. No vanities with drawers, no bulbs that pretend to be sunlight, just objects that work when the road is muddy. The well is stingy, and the room has more draught than privacy. First the comb, 2 widths of teeth for 2 kinds of trouble. The wide side tames tangles raised by wind and wool. The fine side patrols the scalp for stowaways you'd rather not introduce to the parish. You warm it by the hearth, so it glides. You dip it in rosemary water when you can spare the leaves. Some combs carry carved prayers, not because saints untangle hair, but because patience needs company. Within the logic of medieval beauty standards, a clean, orderly braid announces character faster than a poem. Diligence on the crown, discipline at every crossing of the plait. Pins are strategy disguised as glitter. A row of plain iron keeps your veil obedient. One silver pin, if fortune is smiling, turns obedience into grace. You learn how many pins hold through a market day, and where to place the last one, so wind can't draft comedy at your expense. There's craft here, and a little combat. Veils snag, hoods slip, and sleeves conspire against hair the moment you're near a candle. Courtly appearance rules aren't just about modesty. They're also about safety. Nothing says, new scandal, like singed linen in the nave. Pins, frankly, rescue reputations. What? The mirror is the humblest tyrant you'll ever serve. Polished bronze doesn't flatter, it edits. You angle it toward a window, and the light is either honest or rude, never both. You aren't contouring. You're checking that the forehead stays high, the cheeks red, rested, and the mouth hasn't become a battlefield for breadcrumbs. A friend stands behind you with kind eyes and cruel accuracy. In this dance between vanity versus virtue, the mirror acts as your village, quick to notice, quicker to forget if you fix it fast and get on with your chores. Now, the powders and pasties, the portable pantry of small mercies, ground oats for a gentle scrub, crushed eggshell and a breath of chalk for a cautious pail, a smear of honey to bargain with winter, alkanet root or a berry-stained cloth for a blush that survives rain. You portion them with a wooden spoon that knows how not to spill in a saddlebag. None of this shouts. It whispers, I slept, or I prayed, or I'm not bringing yesterday to market. When image versus survival wrestles, these light touches let you look capable without pretending the wind didn't have opinions. Liquids travel like secrets. Corked vials of rose water, vinegar steeped with thyme, a simple oil that keeps skin from cracking, where laughter plans to live. You cut the rose water with well water if supplies are thin. You take the vinegar straight on mornings that need a wake-up with teeth. Dab the pulse points, pass the cloth behind ears, wipe the palms, so bread buyers don't shake hands with kitchen smoke. Is it luxury? Not exactly. It's logistics scented enough to be kind. That's the middle road between vanity versus virtue, cleanliness that behaves like courtesy. Teeth and breath get their own pocket. Salt and sage powder in a twist of cloth, a licorice or hazel twig for chewing, a pinch of cloves you guard like coin. You don't aim for the glassy smiles in later portraits. You aim for a radius of comfort. An agreeable mouth wins errands and softens arguments. A stubborn smell can derail a bargain before the first price is named. If a tooth aches, a whole afternoon collapses. So the twig travels, and so does your patience. This is image versus survival in a 3-inch package. Small tools keeping big hours from falling apart. Cloth is your stealth ally. In the box lives a folded square of fine linen that can be a handkerchief, a powder shield, a veil rescuer, or a truce flag between hot skin and cold wind. Another square is for emergencies, ink stew, baby, altar candle. Washed at the first stream you trust and dried on a bush like a prayer for sun. People praise the colour of your gown. They don't see the rag that made it possible. That's true of most everyday grooming in the Middle Ages. The quiet textile work backstage that keeps the performance from tripping. Jewellery is less fashion, more punctuation. A narrow ring draws the eye from a rough knuckle. A brooch pins a story to a shoulder and says, I am not careless. Even a humble bead, polished by thumb and time, can turn fatigue into intention. Yet every bright thing is weighed against chores and coins. You learn when sparkle invites questions you don't want. And when it says, market day success without bragging. Medieval beauty standards always knew this. Adornment should confirm the story, your work already told. Paint has a drawer in the box, and no, we won't pretend it doesn't. Tweezers, or a sharp thread for stray hairs where the forehead wants the stage. A pumice pebble for a heel that keeps making its own weather, a splinter needle. Sterilized in fire if you're wise. For the day a bench tells a joke at your expense. These are painful beauty rituals in their mildest, most negotiable form. Nothing theatrical, just the cost of presenting a body as ready to a world that confuses readiness with worth. You do it quickly, with humour if possible, and with bread after. Seasonal kit matters. Summer adds a sachet of crushed mint to bully sweat. Winter swaps in goose grease cut with rosemary for chapped knuckles and wind-bitten cheeks. Pilgrim roads ask for more vinegar and fewer powders. Feast weeks demand extra pins and the good oil you ration, like psalms. The box changes as the sky changes, and that's the hidden wisdom beneath courtly appearance rules. Adapt the ritual to the weather, or the weather will write your reputation without asking permission. Finally, there's the etiquette of using all this in public. You step aside near a window rather than into the centre of the room. You fix 3 things, not 13. You share a drop of scent with a friend because generosity is flattering in ways rouge can't imitate. Then you close the lid with the same little click, tuck the box where your hand remembers it, and walk back into the day. The box doesn't promise beauty. It promises options. Options turn into confidence faster than chalk turns into glow. You can feel the next chapter tugging your sleeve, can't you? Tools are one thing, rules are another. Now that your kit is packed, we have to walk into the spaces where grooming meets policings, sumptuary laws, parish gossip, and the not-so-subtle game of who's allowed to look like what. Ready to open the door where fashion gets arrested and image versus survival has to hire a lawyer. You don't just dress yourself, you enter negotiations. Step into a market street, and you can feel the eyes measuring cloth and conscience at the same time. In some towns, a bead too bright invites a fine. In others, a sleeve too long invites a sermon. That's the quiet muscle of courtly appearance rules, not just what's pretty, but what's proper for someone like you. Tailors knew the statutes the way bakers know sunrise, and mothers kept a mental abacus of 1 more ribbon, and the parish starts to talk. Sumptuary laws smelled like ink and anxiety. Decrees listed who could wear fur, how wide a belt might be, how many pearls could sit on a neckline before your neighbours called it treason by sparkle. The intention was order, the effect was theatre. You'd see a merchant's wife counting slashes on a sleeve like rosary beads, or a guildmaster's daughter trimming lace because a steward's nephew was watching. Medieval beauty standards didn't float in the air. They were hammered into ordinances and then folded into laundry. Church bell did more than call to prayer. It set the tempo for your face. A little colour on your cheek read as God-given vigour, a lot read as unearned joy. Priests warned against excess. Poets praised radiance, disciplined by humility. That's the rhythm of vanity versus virtue. Be luminous, but don't look like you tried. You learned to pinch a blush at the door, not in the nave, and to keep your veil obedient when incense made your skin want to sigh. Gossip was the neighbourhood's unofficial police, and it travelled faster than any sheriff. A widow's new brooch became suspicious. A plucked hairline became prideful. A glove scented with rosemary turned into a rumour about secret admirers. You could hear reputation clatter, like wooden shoes on stone. Work with the current, and gossip carried you. Fight it, and it sanded you down. That's image versus survival in its purest form. Dress not only for the weather, but for the story the weather will inspire. Meanwhile, the law pretended to be simple. Silk for them, wool for you. Reality argued back in the alleyway. People dyed homespun until it flirted with forbidden shades. They trimmed a rough cloth close, so it lay with noble manners. They stitched modesty with cunning, adding a single refined ribbon where the eye travels first. In this space, everyday grooming in the Middle Ages turned into strategy. You couldn't buy status, but you could choreograph it, one seam at a time. Markets doubled as mirrors. A fishmonger's hands said tide, before they said taste. A scribe's inked fingers apologized for nothing. A novice's plain gown softened the light around her like a benediction. You learn to read materials the way hunters read tracks. Linen means effort, fur means permission, velvet means paperwork. The courtly appearance rules went only about courts. They percolated down to hedgerows and hearths, as real as the price of salt. When edicts tightened, creativity exhaled. A bride whose family couldn't parade silver-braided tin threads into her hair, catching firelight so cleverly, the steward blinked and let it pass. A brewer's son waxed his boots until they looked like a cousin of patent leather, only to scuff them intentionally before church, so they wouldn't preach ambition. Too loudly. This is the sly dance of image versus survival, comply in letter, compose in spirit, and hope the beadle has poor eyesight. Pain came wrapped in piety more often than in vanity. A highbrow for learning required tweezers and courage. A tightly laced kirtle for posture borrowed your breath to pay for elegance. These were painful beauty rituals, blessed by decorum, not decadence. And that's why they endured. When neighbours praised your virtuous bearing, they were also admiring your stamina. A compliment at Vespers might be a thank you note to the body you negotiated into that silhouette. Complicated the sermon. A rich merchant could buy the Countess's fabric, but not the Countess' permission, so he performed humility, with thread counts and colours that nodded to the law. Nobles sometimes dressed down in public and feasted in velvet in private, because envy is a tax with no receipt. In between, you stood with your little box of combs and powders, practicing everyday grooming in the Middle Ages, to make thrift look like taste and patience like policy. Enforcement had a smell: warmed wax on seals, damp parchment, the leather of a steward's belt, and it had a rhythm. Festivals brought stricter eyes, fast days brought sterner tongues. Tailors learned to ask, for which day, as carefully as they measured shoulders. A feast warranted bolder trim, a funeral demanded edits. You weren't merely avoiding fines. You were aligning your body with a calendar that judged as loudly as it sang. Yet timeless threaded through it, if you knew where to look. An aunt passed down a wimple that hid a scar, and silenced a long story. A neighbour taught you to blue your linen so it read cleaner than it felt. A midwife slipped a clove into a nervous bride's palm before her first public meal. The courtly appearance rules were less terrifying when women shared footnotes. Quiet hacks for being seen without becoming spectacle, for being respectable without disappearing. What happens when the law says, no velvet, your work says, no grime, and the season says, no mercy? You begin to curate the body itself, skin, hair, breath, as your most legal garment. That's where the next chapter takes us. To the thresholds where bodies are edited instead of gowns, where recipes for clarity and light meet warnings about lead and fire, and where vanity versu is adjudicated by a face rather than a hem, ready to open the potions and the cautions, the beauty that bites back. Open the recipe book and you'll smell the warning before you read it. Vinegar with a metallic edge, crushed shells, herbs that whisper comfort, and powders that don't. Medieval households loved experiments, and some worked. Rosewater to soothe, almond oil to soften, oatmeal to calm a stormy cheek. But the moment pursuit of radiance outran prudence medieval beauty standards, veered into chemistry with teeth. A paste to blur freckles and, months later, blur the lines of a frown forever. The page soothed while the jar negotiated. Start with pallor, the age's favourite myth. A face, white as candlelight, signalled gentility, prayer, and indoorsy ease. Fields wrote freckles nobody at court wanted to read. Enter whiteners, chalk and crushed eggshell, mostly harmless, then the brighter devils dressed as miracles. Lead-laced ceruse promised the milk of angels and delivered a porcelain that cracked in winter and wept in summer. Skin tightened until it spoke in fine lines. Sores learned to hide under powder. In the ledger of image versus survival, the interest compounded quietly. Mercury wore moonlight like a bribe. Sublimates flashed away spots, flattened shine, and banished yesterday for a minute you could measure. Then came tremor, tooth pain, blue gums, mood sliding downhill like sleet on slate. Still, under cold torchlight, that slick clarity read as, well, when neighbours admired your rested look, they were praising a storm you hadn't met yet. If vanity versus virtue is a courtroom, Mercury argued like a charming liar with fast shoes. Hair met its own set of bargains. You could brighten with chamomile, saffron, even sun, gentle, slow, forgiving. Or you could flirt with quicklime, which warms when wet and doesn't mind eating what it touches. Some used lime to tidy hairlines or soften stubble. Sometimes it tidied skin as well, right off the map. A singed edge under a wimple doesn't confess, but it stings like memory. These were painful beauty rituals that doubled as cautionary tales passed down in kitchen whispers. Brows and lashes threaded humility and risk. Plucking the hairline higher preached learned composure. Thinning brows spoke quiet over quarrel. Egg white could stiffen lashes into polite curves. Soot could line eyes against smoke. There were also shadowed cold jars with questionable guests. Antimony, sometimes worse. Eyes gleamed, lids burned, vision winced. In the theatre of courtly appearance rules, the spotlight sometimes set the curtains on fire. Freckle cures ranged from adorable to alarming. Harmless pots married honey and lemon to patience. Harsher ones wooed copper salts or verdigris, which smell like pennies and evening regret. Spots lightened because skins surrendered. Winter returned with new negotiations. Peeling, rawness, and the fashionable ache you're not supposed to mention. A face that reads pure at vespers might be bargaining with basilisk breath behind the scenes. You can hear everyday grooming in the Middle Ages sigh, could we not? Even scents could misbehave. Honest herbal waters, rosemary, lavender, mint, wore kindness like a shawl. But musk cut with rancid fat turned room temperature treachery when a hall heated. Civet in heavy hands argued with soup. Ambergris forgave everything except excess. Perfume wasn't strictly cosmetic. It was policy for noses. But if it shouted, it testified against you. Not elegant, just edited too loudly. That's vanity versus virtue, at the speed of smell. Teeth were their own uneasy parish. Salt, ash, sage, and mint played well with enamel. Charcoal could polish without plotting rebellion. Then came powders boasting mercury or acidic wines that stripped discomfort and a little future right off. Breath rinses conquered onion, sure, but some brought gums to their knees. A lovely smile in the hall. A throbbing confession by the hearth. The body keeps receipts, even when portraits don't. The pot that promised smooth hands sometimes took fingerprints as payment. Lye soaps cleaned well and bit hard. A loom tightened like a prudent scold. Vinegar made peace until it didn't. To mend the damage, people reached for goose fat, beeswax, or olive oil, balms that smelled like kitchens and olive groves and common sense. Often the cure was simpler than the cause, which is why grand recipes travel farther than humble mercies. That gap is image versus survival in miniature. Who enforced caution? Not statutes so much as sisters, aunts, and midwives. The best warnings travelled as stories. Hair cheeks were roses in Advent, and by Lent the roses stayed without her. A maid would switch a mistress pot for a saner one, and take the scolding. A friend would pass on the mint and hide the lime. The real regulators of courtly appearance rules were women who preferred you living to you luminous. Men went exempt. A courtier's rouge lived in his barber's drawer, Lead powder tamed shine on foreheads that argued with torches. Beard oils softened tempers and hid last night's wine. A fashionable man could oversteer as well. Too white, too scented, too eager to pass for marble. The penalties weren't just medical, they were social. Nothing ages faster than the look that tries too hard to be yesterday's angel. So here's the rub to tuck behind your mirror. The jar labelled Miracle is often asking for a future you can spare. In a world where medieval beauty standards pressed hard and winters pressed harder, the wise invested in sleep, linen, and gentle light, then used paint like punctuation. Next we'll step out of the chest and into the ritual space itself. Baths, steam, benches, and the choreography of washing when water was a rumour, and privacy a luxury. Ready to feel heat, hear splash, and decide how clean you can get without paying for it in January. Picture a winter lane hissing under cartwheels as you step into a bathhouse that breathes like a bread oven. L'Actual. The door shuts and the world changes temperature. Damp wood, wet wool, resinous smoke, laughter that fogs the air. In some towns the baths are civic, almost Roman in their confidence. In others modest, candlelit, and nervously watched by priests who worry what steam does to virtue. You come here to reset body and mood, to rinse away market dust and cooking smoke, and to bargain with chill. It's where everyday grooming in the Middle Ages goes from private ritual to public choreography, equal parts soap and society. Water never arrives casually. Buckets grown up from Wells braziers devour firewood, and a careful soul tests heat with a finger and a prayer. Soap might be tallow and lye, with a bite that makes hands complain, or a milder ash-based brew, if the keeper is kind. Herbs play chorus, thyme for sore muscles, rosemary for nerves, sage for the cold that won't take a hint. In this room, image versus survival is literal. You bathe to look rested, yes, but also so joints will bend, sleep will arrive, and winter won't win. Etiquette enters with your sandals. Mixed bathing exists in some places and seasons. In others, hours divide by sex, and the beadle's eyes, dewlaps like a vigilant gull. You wrap a linen around hips or chest, hang your veil on a peg that already knows gossip, and learn the quiet rules. Don't splash like a barge. Don't hog the hottest bench, and don't pretend the steam makes you invisible. Courtly appearance rules leak into the baths as posture. Modest angles, hands that mind their own business, and jokes that land soft. Skin remembers both kindness and cruelty. The strigil, bronze or wood, scrapes sweat and oil in long, satisfying strokes. A rough cloth polishes. A friend helps with the shoulder you can't reach. You promise to stop at glow, not raw, and then keep going 2 strokes anyway, because clean sometimes doubles as confession. These aren't grand, painful beauty rituals, but they can sting, especially where winter has taught the body to be brittle. Afterwards, honey oil or goose fat returns. Skin to its job without squeaking. Not everyone approves. Preachers fret that hot water dissolves discipline. Physicians argue whether open pores invite bad airs. City councils issue bath curfews during plague months and post sour-faced notices near the door. Still, people come. Labourers thaw. Midwives soothe backs that have lifted more secrets than sacks. Travellers exchange road maps and recipes. In the steam's democracy, medieval beauty standards soften into simple, forgiving categories. Tired, less tired, better now. Linen does quiet heroism beside the tub. Clean shifts weight like promises. You step out of heat into fabric that drinks water and gives it back as comfort. Clean by change isn't laziness. It's engineering for short daylight and expensive fuel. A fresh chemise under the same gown remakes your mood and your scent, even when snow says the copper stays cold tonight. This is image versus survival at the granular level. Threads doing the heavy lifting while firewood keeps its opinion. Hair gets its own appointment. In some houses, a basin is set apart for rinses, rosemary for scalp, chamomile for a little sunlit glint, vinegar to scold the soap into behaving. Combs warmed by the brazier move like diplomacy through knots raised by hoods and wind. Lice are a fact, not a scandal. Nitpicking happens with the solidarity of people who share benches, bread, and weather. When hair is braided again, tighter, tidier, you wear more than cleanliness, you wear cooperation. The bathhouse is also a market of murmurs. A brewer's wife swears by barley water for skin. A mason's daughter knows which herbs help bruises earned by stone. A widow passes on a clove for breath, and a trick for bluing linen that fools judgmental eyes. Knowledge moves faster here than in guild halls, because steam lowers defences. You catch a line that will matter later. You scent to frame, not to shout. A neat distillation of vanity versus virtue you will repeat to yourself on feast days. Risks, look, and people aren't naive. You learn to sit where drafts don't bully hot skin, to leave before wooziness edits your steps, to avoid bathhouses that smell like yesterday's rumour. During sickness seasons, schedules break. Separate hours, extra vinegar, fewer jokes. Some families retreat to home tubs. A small copper, a kettle parade, and a room warmed to, barely. It's slower, more private and stitched to chores. Yet even at home, the ritual is communal in spirit. Someone stirs the kettle, someone guards the door, someone times the cooling cloth. After the wash comes the theatre of re-entry. You oil pulse points lightly, so the outside air doesn't slap. You choose the fresh shift with the least argument. You tuck a sprig of mint into your pouch for the walk home. Faces in the road read you differently. Eyes calmer, shoulders looser. And you feel how medieval beauty standards linked radiance to resources that were really habits: warmth, water, linen, timing. The glow isn't cosmetic. It's competence that smells faintly of rosemary. Not every village has baths, and not every purse can spare the coin. On those weeks, washing is a patchwork. A basin at dawn, snow rubbed briskly on stubborn spots, a rag that moves from face to neck to hands like a tiny procession of mercy. You still change linen, air cloaks, beat dust from hems, and boil water when fuel and time court each other. Everyday grooming in the Middle Ages doesn't vanish without the bathhouse. It adapts, stubbornly and without applause. Hold one more detail before we step out. The door out of the baths is a hinge between versions of you. You came in as work, you leave as readiness. And that readiness will next be tested where hair, veils and modesty meet fashion. How a forehead becomes a thesis, how a wimple edits the room, how braids, pins and fabric negotiate faith, status and flirtation without breaking a single statute. If you're up for it, we'll sit at a hearth and map the politics of hair. Start with the sound of a comb gliding through morning, teeth clicking softly, strands separating like threads on a loom. In a one-room cottage or a stone-walled manor, hair is the first headline of the day, and everyone reads it. A single thick braid says capable, two plaits wrapped like a crown say orderly. Loose hair, that's for children, brides or saints in paintings. You're playing within courtly appearance rules, not because you love rules, but because hair talks faster than you do, about station, season, and whether you've made peace with the weather. For married women, the veil is not a surrender, it's a tool. Linen wimples cup the jaw, soften profiles, and keep smoke scent from clinging where gossip sniffs first. In warmer towns, a light barbet and fillet frame the face, like parentheses, tidy and cool. In the north, layers multiply into a weatherproof argument against sleep. You pin by muscle memory. 3 along the brow, 2 behind the ear, 1 anchor where wind likes to meddle. Modesty, yes, but also mastery. In the ledger of image versus survival, head coverings earn their keep by insulating dignity and hair alike. The era's strangest fashion love story is the high forehead. A spacious brow reads as learning and serenity. So many women pluck the hairline back a finger, sometimes two. Is it one of those painful beauty rituals? Absolutely. A friend holds a candle, you grip the bench, and the tiny roots protest in chorus. Yet the result feels like quiet authority, more parchment for the eyes to write on. If you wince, remember, you've probably done modern equivalents for less payoff. At least this one signals, I can keep my temper in a long sermon. Colour has a script of its own. Chamomile and sun-coaxed fair glints. Walnut hulls deepen brown into late autumn wheat. A saffron rinse lends gold when feast days demand warmth. The honest scents are meadow bright and domestic, nothing theatrical. But shortcuts lurk: quicklime to strip, ash to blanch. Those rush jobs leave hair that crackles like frost and breaks a week later. Medieval beauty standards could be met gently if you were patient, or rapidly if you were reckless. The wise chose time over trauma, and hats over hubris. Braids are both engineering and poetry. For farm work, you want plaits that lock under a coif and never flirt with the churn. For a fair, you loop them above the ears and thread a ribbon that catches lamplight, confident but not loud. On wedding days, ribbon becomes language. Your family's colour tucked into the weave, a tiny sprig of rosemary pinned at the nape for memory. These gestures satisfy vanity versus virtue because they celebrate craft, not excess. Beauty as competence the village can trust. Lice are the enemy nobody pretends away. Knit combs vinegar, patient fingers by hearthlight. That's the quiet hygiene beneath elegance. You learn to warm the comb so it moves like mercy, to part hair with a lacing needle when the fine teeth need help, to wash the coif more often than the gossip expect. This is everyday grooming in the Middle Ages at its most unromantic and most heroic. Victory measured in sighs of relief, not applause. And once the scalp is calm, even a simple braid looks like grace rediscovered. Headgear becomes architecture when towns grow rich. Escoffions, padded rolls, heart-shaped frames. Later, hennins rising like a bell tower with a comet tail veil. They're fun, implausible, and they run on pins, patience, and a perfectly trained posture. Want to keep your neck? Balance the weight, shorten the tail outdoors, and don't try doorways at speed. Sumptuary notices grumble. Parish aunts roll their eyes. Still, a tall headdress can be moral theatre, face veiled, jaw softened, eyes framed. The spectacle bows to courtly appearance rules while secretly flirting with the horizon. Men negotiate too. A page wears a tidy bowl cut that says, "Hireable." A merchant shows prosperity in well-trimmed curls that behave in a counting house. A knight toggles between wind-tamed length on campaign and cropped convenience at court. After Lent, the barber earns his keep, taming swagger into audience-appropriate hair. Beards cycle with fashion and devotion, shaved for youth and piety, neatly kept for seniority. If a man's hair greases, chalk tames it. If it flies, a dab of oil persuades. Masculine grooming still answers vanity versus virtue, just with fewer ribbons, more razors. Tools matter. Wooden combs, polished smooth. Bone pins, light and sturdy. A small oil pot to quiet halo frizz where wool rubs. A narrow band to relieve pressure under heavy veils. You set them out each morning like a sailor lays rope, ready for weather and work. When travel calls, a coif folds flat. Ribbons coil into a walnut-sized promise, and the mirror, more honesty than flattery, rides wrapped in cloth. The kit is modest, but it's reliable, and reliability is the real luxury under most medieval beauty standards. Ritual makes the scalp an altar to calm. Before market, a slow combing down and out. Before mass, a quick pass that leaves the hair obedient under veil. Before bed, a loosened braid to keep dreams from tugging. Mothers teach daughters to listen with their hands. Tightness behind the ear, means ease the pin. Tenderness at the crown means rest the headdress tomorrow. There's medicine here. Headache prevention as etiquette, comfort as compliance. Image versus survival merges when the body is consulted first. Of course, there are mishaps. A pin snaps mid-fare. Steam at the bath loosens everything at once. A headdress catches a mischievous draught and announces your presence to the entire nave. You learn the save. A hidden hair tie of thread in your sleeve. A spare pin tucked in the seam. A friendly grin that turns slapstick into a story. In a society that remembers, repair is a moral skill. The prettiest head in town is often the one that has rehearsed recovery. Hold this closing picture: a hearth, a lap, and a slow braid at dusk, while someone reads a saint's life or hums an old tune. Hair becomes a ledger of the day, dust combed out, pins counted back in, ribbons smoothed for tomorrow. You're not painting perfection. You're maintaining peace. Next we'll step from crown to silhouette, lacing, layering, and how cloth carved the body into ideals the season could bear. So you can feel how a waist, a sleeve, and a hem negotiated vanity versus virtue stitch by stitch, ready to thread a needle and tug the line between comfort and show. Stand by the hearth and lay the garments out in order like tools for a delicate operation. Chemise first, then hose, then kirtle, then gown, belt last. Nothing here is random. Linen breathes closest to the skin. Wool carries the season. And the outer fabric argues with weather and witnesses. You aren't just getting dressed. You're composing a paragraph people will read before they hear your name. Under medieval beauty standards, shape is grammar. The line from shoulder to hip says more about steadiness than any speech you'll make at market. Lacing is negotiation in chord. Side laced for privacy, front laced for practicality, back laced for drama when help is available. Each hole is a punctuation mark. Each pull edits posture. Tight enough to lift, never so tight it steals breath or turns prayer into coughing. A thoughtful maid laces in a spiral, not a crisscross, so tension distributes like kindness. There's an art here that lives between vanity versus virtue. Upright, composed, but never theatrical enough to invite a sermon. Layering is your indoor climate policy. A close kirtle hugs warmth to the ribs. A looser gown makes air behave like polite company. A hood adds weather insurance without shouting, poverty or pride. In summer, you swap to lighter worsteds, loosen at the waist after dinner, and trust linen to ferry sweat away like a quiet boatman. In winter, linings earn their keep and sleeves become negotiations with frost. This is image versus survival in a language of fibre. Look capable, stay warm, spend fuel on soup, not vanity. Sleeves are diplomacy at the wrist. Work sleeves tie short, keep gravy and gossip off the cuffs. Feast sleeves trail just enough to say you won't be stirring porridge tonight. Detachable sleeves multiply options when purses do not. One kirtle, 3 sleeve moods. Tailors know how to cut a sleeve head so it sits like patience, not like a shrug. Under courtly appearance rules the wrong sleeve at the wrong hour. Reads like a joke you didn't mean to tell. Belts and girdles are commas that control the sentence. Tighten before the steward. Loosen in the bakehouse. Slide a purse, keys, a knife. Small tools that make dignity portable. A narrow belt lifts the kirtle line and suggests readiness. A jeweled girdle, if law and coin allow, frames the waist like a promise. Even a simple rope, clean and well knotted, says, I planned today. In everyday grooming in the Middle Ages, function that looks tidy becomes fashion by accident. Necklines are barometers of mood, class, and season. A high-bound edge signals winter work or watchfulness. A scooped neckline under a veil softens angles without leaking scandal. Add a partlet for modesty that moves with the hour. On in church, off by the hearth. And suddenly you're fluent in subtlety. Tailors raise or lower a line by the width of 2 fingers, and 2 fingers can mean the difference between serene and showy. The church rarely had to scold when cut and cloth could whisper the same warnings. Colour is weather for the eyes. Russet says, durable leaf green says, feast walled blues live at the honest end of the ledger, madder reds flirt with celebration. You choose hues that forgive smoke and complement candlelight. You avoid the dye that sulks under rain. When money or statute limits the palate, trim does the talking. Narrow bands at cuff and hem that draw the eye and pretend you slept 8 hours. This is vanity versus virtue expressed in dye pots. Brightness edited by restraint. Fit is a conversation with the mirror you don't own. A well-set shoulder seam lets arms work without announcing muscle. A gently curved side seam suggests waist without taking prisoners. Gauze in the skirt adds swirl without waist. The best garments look inevitable, the way a good path looks obvious after someone else has cut it. Tailoring in this age is problem-solving, disguised as prettiness, and medieval beauty standards reward solutions that breathe. Fastenings are small truths. Laces forgive a feast, hooks are decisive, brooches bridge gaps when winter and linen disagree. Good pins never argue with veils. Bad pins declare independence at the worst moment. You learn to carry one spare in the cuff, like a secret truce. The person who can repair a bodice quietly at a threshold wields a kind of power that needs no crest. Grace under deadlines, which is the soul of everyday grooming in the Middle Ages. Weight matters more than trends admit. Too heavy, and the garment owns you. Too light, and wind writes your biography through the cloth. A lined bodice can be virtue's exoskeleton, holding you upright when news is heavy. A skirt with honest swing keeps heat from bullying knees. Cloth that partners with movement reads as youthful without cosmetic lies, and people will call it beauty when it's really engineering. Pain appears here too, and not only in tweezers. Overlacing bruises, ribs, and edits breath into starch. Sleeves cut too tight make chores into penance. Belts worn low bite hips with every step. These are painful beauty rituals hidden in respectable tailoring, and the whys adjust. 2 eyelets looser, a sleeve head recute, a belt moved a finger higher. Mercy's invisible to everyone except your afternoon. Beauty that survives the road is the only kind worth keeping. Now step back and look in the largest mirror available. Someone else's eyes. Do they read steadiness? Can they tell you'll finish what you start? That's the silhouette doing its job. Quiet authority sewn into seams. Next we'll let the camera roam down to hands and feet, nails, shoes, gait, and watch how touch and tread finish the portrait, from market mud to manor floors, where image versus survival is tested with every step you take. Look at your hands the way a medieval neighbour would. They're not accessories, they're affidavits. Nails, of course. Calluses sign your labour. Ink stains whisper literacy. A soft palm behind a veil suggests indoor work and careful heat. Under medieval beauty standards, the most persuasive makeup for hands is neatness, clean nails, quiet scent, and a steadiness that calms bread, beasts, and people. You don't aim for porcelain. You aim for capable. Touch that says, I won't drop your secret, and I know where the hot end of the kettle lies. Morning begins with a hand basin and small theology. Ashen lysa bites a little. A vinegar rinse answers back with brightness. A linen cloth blots like mercy. You rub a breadcrumb or ground oats along the knuckles to lift kitchen stories. A thumb smears a breath of honey on winter cracks before they turn into complaints. This is everyday grooming in the Middle Ages at its simplest: warmth, water, patience. The reward isn't glamour, it's grip and comfort, which, on market day, are worth more than rouge. Nails announce your household before your name does. Short and rounded reads practical. Scimitars read impractical, even comic, outside the minstrel stage. You keep a bone or horn buffer for a soft sheen, a pinch of wood ash to lighten the rims, a lemon slice, luxury day, to skull stains. Bright dyes on nails are rare and risky where courtly appearance rules prize restraint. A clean half-moon says more about your sense than a painted one ever could. The rule of thumb, pun mildly intended, is oath ready. Could you swear a promise without your hands betraying you? Knuckles and wrists are small theatres of care. Goose fat, cut with rosemary, becomes a night salve. Beeswax closes the deal in winds that gossip. In harsher weather you pull on knit mitts to keep veins from writing an autobiography in blue. Gloves exist, yes, but daily life leans on plain leather or wool. Perfume, if any, is a whisper at the cuff, never a speech. In the ledger of image versus survival, warm joints beat scented bravado every time. Rings punctuate more than sentences. A token from a guild, a simple band that says married, a pilgrimage ring etched with a saint. Each directs the eye and edits the story. A narrow ring near a work rough knuckle turns grit into narrative. A signet on a merchant's hand makes paper behave. But vanity versus virtue patrols jewelry too. Too many rings invite arithmetic you don't want. One well-chosen piece says, respectable without tutoring envy. Hands, like words, need white space. Etiquette makes cleanliness audible. At meals, ewers and towels circulate before the first bite. Fingertips rest in scented water, rose, mint or myrtle, so bread doesn't learn yesterday's onion. You tear never saw, you touch salt with kindness. You keep the thumb ungreased, because documents and hems will need it later. Genier is choreography. Washing before and after. Standing a step back when offering a cup. So the hall smells like courtesy. This is courtly appearance rules translated into touch. Now feet, the other half of your signature. Shoes are turn shoes, stitched inside out and flipped, supple as good manners. Over muddy streets you strap on wooden patterns that click like punctuation, lifting leather above slop. Soles get tallow or oil, so rain doesn't write itself into them. Insoles hide dried thyme or mint to keep boots from preaching. Foot wraps or hose are changed more often than capes. Again, everyday grooming in the Middle Ages is really inventory discipline. Dry cloth, dry skin, bearable days. Fashion tests scents with a smirk. Poulaines, the long-toed shoes, point forward like ambition and, yes, look magnificent under candlelight. They also invent new blisters, bend toes into opinions, and convert puddles into slapstick. The savvy limit length to what doors and days allow. The reckless learn why cobblers pray. Here, painful beauty rituals live below the ankle. Vinegar soaks, blister lancing by firelight, and a morning walk that begins with negotiation rather than stride. Gait is grammar, you can hear across a room. A grounded step says, work finished. A floating step says, help available. A clatter says, forgot patterns off at the threshold. Rush-strewn floors are slippery, so you learn the heel-to-ball roll that keeps soup in bowls and dignity on rails. In courts, courtly appearance rules turn walking into rhetoric. Small steps near the dais. Softer on gallery wood. Slower when bearing news that needs listeners. Even outdoors, your pace edits your biography. Hurry looks guilty. Dawdle looks idle. Measured reads trustworthy. Maintenance is half cobbler, half meteorology. Check the heel before the sermon. Tighten the latchet before the hill. Scrape mud before the door remembers you. Beeswax on seams, tallow on soles. A quick airing by the hearth, so damp doesn't colonize leather. Patterns live by the threshold, so hems stay clean. In wet seasons, your belt carries a spare tie to rescue a blown strap. That's image versus survival at ground level. Avoid the kind of stumble that becomes a family anecdote. Feet get their share of reverence too. At day's end, a warm soak with sage or bay persuades joints to forgive. A pumice kisses heels until they stop catching on linen. A wool sock dried on a warm stone turns sleep into medicine. None of this is luxury, just the cost of walking tomorrow without limping. Under medieval beauty standards, a beautiful gait is simply a painless one that reads as reliability. Put hands and feet together and the portrait finishes itself. A clean nail lifts a ladle without commentary. A polished shoe steps across a chapel threshold without clatter. A measured stride and steady grip make people relax before you speak. Your body says, "I will not spill, drop, or rush." That frees your face to do subtler work, listening, choosing, smiling when the world earns it. Which is where we're headed next. The social cosmetics of voice, laughter, and small courtesies, the invisible powders that make rooms behave, so you can see how poise and speech completed the look when paint and pins had finished their part. Start with the one thing no mirror catches: your sound. In a timbered hall, voices skate on oak and bounce off plaster, so volume becomes wardrobe. You pitch low enough to respect the rafters, clear enough to cut through rush-strewn floors, and slow enough that a baker can measure dough to your syllables. Under medieval beauty standards, a well-shaped voice read as grooming every bit as much as a clean veil. Loud, said hungry. Whispery, said slippery. Steady, said safe. And safety was beautiful because it let others breathe. Greeting is fragrance without perfume. At market you nod first, words after. At church you bow to the altar before you bow to a neighbour. In a manner you greet the household by rank and the dog by name. Hands rinse at the ewer before touch, and you keep the right thumb dry for parchment and hems. These micro-rituals are everyday grooming in the Middle Ages, translated into manners. You clean the moment so the conversation doesn't pick up yesterday's dirt. Laughter is jewelry. You loan a room. Too bright, and it feels like coins on stone. Too thin, and it sounds like a hinge that needs oil. The sweet spot is shoulder warm and brief, leaving space for other people's punchlines. Clergy preferred a smile that knew Latin. Guildmates wanted something earthier, like a chuckle that could lift a cask. Courtly appearance rules policed laughter, more than rouge. Joy was welcome, but it had to fit the hour, the ceiling, and the company's appetite. Storytelling was social starch. You trim details like sleeves, short for market, long for hearth, so boredom never clung. Names were used sparingly and kindly. Blame was laundered unless truth demanded heat. The trick was to let humility frame. Wit, a neat solution to vanity versus virtue. Be memorable, but not at someone else's expense. A good tale left people brighter than it found them. The conversational equivalent of fresh linen under old wool. Timing was the unseen comb. You didn't interrupt a blessing, a receipt, or a mother counting children. You did interrupt a rumour if it began to breed. Compliments arrived first thing, criticisms only after bread. When tempers rose, you opened the nearest window, 2 fingers, and let silence do 5 beats of work. This is image versus survival in etiquette's clothing, keeping the air honest so discussions don't rot. Apology had a toolkit. You softened the eyes, lowered the chin, and offered to repair rather than explain. If you spilled wine, you blotted the tablecloth first, and your pride second. A small gift, sprig of rosemary, warm roll, clean cloth, mended more afternoons than speeches ever did. People called such grace good breeding, but it was really maintenance. The same instinct that changes a chemise before another chore. Hygiene for trust, performed in plain sight. At table, the choreography smelled like mint and restraint. Fingers were washed in scented water before bread. Salt was pinched, not scooped. Knives served food, not opinions. You never chased a pea across the board like a fox. You let it go, and the room respected you for knowing when to lose. These little obediences to courtly appearance rules polished more reputations than pearls. A clean gesture could make a patched sleeve look deliberate. Eye contact was a needle. You didn't tug too hard. In council, you anchored gaze to whoever owned the question. In church, you dropped it when pride tried to strut. With children, you met their eyes long enough to teach courage, short enough to leave room for mischief. Eyes that never landed read as sly, eyes that pinned read as rude. Balance pleased both saints and stewards, and balance is the purest cosmetic. A face can wear. Silence had flavours. There was the silence that honoured sorrow, the silence that invited thought, and the sullen quiet that turned a bench cold. You learned to offer the first two and avoid the third. In tense rooms, a single sentence, "Shall I fetch clean water?" did more good than a paragraph. That's everyday grooming in the Middle Ages at a moral scale. Tidy the moment, not just the body, and the whole house looks better. Gestures folded virtue into posture. You stepped back to give a neighbour the dry plank. You carried the heavy end without announcing it. You held the door an inch longer for a man whose pride would accept help. These acts were invisible makeup, tinting the scene in your favour without staining anyone. Vanity versus virtue stopped being a tug-of-war when usefulness made you luminous. People forgive plain faces. They rarely forget generous hands. Even courage had etiquette. Speak truth like bread, fresh, necessary, shared, never like a blade flashed for sport. When a lie strutted, you corrected softly, and brought a witness so dignity didn't have to pay for accuracy. You saved anger for the unforgivable, and used humour not humiliation for the rest. In a century that prized order, this calibrated bravery was gorgeous. It made rooms safer, which made faces kinder, which is what medieval beauty standards were reaching for all along. And yes, there were painful beauty rituals of the tongue, holding it, swallowing the clever cut when it would only win you a minute and lose you a month. In private, you let off steam with a friend and a crust. In public, you let mercy edit your sentence. That restraint kept alliances from blistering. Next, we'll put these invisible cosmetics under harder light. Feast days and fast days, courts and pilgrim roads, where etiquette collides with spectacle, and the body must carry its beauty on little sleep and long miles, ready to see how grace survives crowds. Feast day dawn hits like a trumpet. Bakers rattle trays, bells knit the air together, and you're dressing by firelight that flatters nothing and forgives less. Linen first, always, because a clean shift is courage you can wear. You warm rosewater in a spoon, wake the eyes, smooth flyaways with a thumb of oil, and breathe on a mirror the size of a biscuit. To check the story your face is telling. Under medieval beauty standards, radiance isn't glitter. It's readiness that people can smell as clean and see as calm. Fast days rewrite the script without dimming the stage. Palettes quiet, russets, woad blues, sober greens, and the mouth learns to speak gently because dinner won't help it later. The trick is to look inward without looking ill, a touch of alkanet at the lip to keep compassion from reading as anemia, brows softened so worry doesn't bark. That's vanity versus virtue at parish tempo. Signal humility, not collapse. And yes, you pack a clove or two because piety is louder when breath isn't. Church is stone cold and echo rich. Voice is dressed differently there. You aim your sound to the timber, not the neighbour's ear, and you let the cadence breathe between pillars. Hands rinse at the narthex ewer. Gloves step off and wait in a pocket that smells faintly of mint. Small courtesies become invisible cosmetics. Washing, spacing, pacing, so the knave keeps its temper. This is everyday grooming in the Middle Ages turned spatial. Not just a tidy face, a tidy echo. After Mass, the fair is a storm of colour and onions and coin. Sun turns dust into politics. and you manage shine with linen, not with powder that clumps in heat. A ribbon at the braid keeps wind from editing your forehead. Patterns lift you above ale, slosh, and new gossip. You taste the air before you taste the pies, because a crowded lane will wear whatever scent the boldest vendor brought. Image versus survival. Here is a math problem. Shade, water, shoes, and patience. Court days are their own endurance. Sport. Sleep was brief, the queue will be long, and the hall's light makes chins sulk and foreheads boast. You bring the quiet cloth to blot the good pin for the veil, and a tiny vial of rosemary water that reads as clean instead of expensive. Voice first, then face. Hand steady, then smile. Courtly appearance. Rules don't reward the prettiest. They reward the most consistent under pressure. Think less diva, more metronome with pulse. Pilgrim roads flatten vanity in a week and teach style that travels. Vinegar becomes cologne and disinfectant. A louse comb outranks jewels. Boots get oiled before prayers. You wash in a bowl under a sky that doesn't care. Change linen like a sacrament and learn which herbs survive saddlebags without turning sour. If someone calls you lovely on the road, they mean uncomplaining, unfrightening, useful. That's image versus survival, boiled down to water, cloth, and stride. Weather is the loudest stylist. Dust writes freckles, the sun underlines, rain makes wool honest and hems treacherous, winter chisels lips and noses into sharp little biographies. You game it with layers that breathe, patterns that click like punctuation, and a gate that promises you won't spill soup or secrets. Painful beauty rituals aren't just tweezers. They're the long day in tight shoes you chose, because feasts make peacocks of us all. The wise peacock packs salve. Inns and borrowed houses, test hygiene is diplomacy. You meet shared beds with rosemary sprigs and brisk linen inspections. You make friends with the boiler and the hostler. You let your hair down only after the fire admits it will behave. Nitpicking by candlelight is not romantic, but neither is scratching through vespers. Travel beauty is a coalition. Your comb, their kettle, the window open 2 fingers, and the humility to call that spa enough. The night before a big day tempts recklessness. One more pass with the pumice, one tighter lace, one stronger scent. Don't. Over scrub, and you'll glow the wrong colour. Over lace, and the sermon will outlast your ribs. Over scent, and bread will taste like your decisions. This is where vanity versus virtue quietly wins by restraint. Stop at willing to listen, not stone angel. Meals edit faces too. Feast days bring salted meats, hot pies, spiced wine. Joys that punish breath and skin if you don't interleave water and walks. Fast days bring clarity, then shakiness. You keep a fig or almond handy, so piety doesn't turn your hands to winter. Parsley is not garnish, it is treaty. A quick rinse, wine cut with water and a pinch of sage, keeps conversation from failing before the second course. Small, unfancy choices keep the canvas believable. Scrutiny multiplies in crowds, and small mistakes develop megaphones. Crooked veil becomes commentary. A scuffed shoe becomes metaphor. A loud laugh becomes a pamphlet. So you rehearse contingencies. Spare pin in cuff, ribbon in sleeve, joke in pocket. Courtly appearance rules are mercy when you practice them. Walk wide of wine. Face the window, not the rumour. Leave before your posture starts to tell the truth about your shoes. Beautiful here means your presence lowered the room's blood pressure. When the day finally ends, bells, markets, miles, smoke. You count the winds that don't trend. Dry socks, unblistered heel, a voice that still knows its indoor volume, a face that told the truth kindly. That's the kind of beauty the century respected, even if it didn't put it in poems. Next we'll test the standard against time itself. illness, age, childbirth, scars. And ask when change became flaw, when flaw became story, and how some faces turned suffering into authority without makeup or miracle. Ready to see how medieval beauty standards handled the one sculptor nobody refuses. Start with the room at dawn when a cough edits the silence. The fire sulks the ewer steams, and a face you love looks older than yesterday's bread. In the Middle Ages, sickness wasn't a plot twist, it was a season. Under medieval beauty standards, health read as light, eyes clear, breath gentle, skin that kept its secrets. But colds, fevers, and long winters taught their own grammar. You learned to read pallor, to hear dryness in laughter, to notice when a forehead stayed cool because the body had stopped writing back. Care began with cloth and patience. Warm water in a wooden bowl, a linen rag wrung to kindness, a dab of honey at the lip where cracks rehearsed complaint. Barley water whispered to the stomach, mint persuaded breath to behave. This is everyday grooming in the Middle Ages turned. Medicinal small mercies repeated until sleep returned. You dimmed the room, not the spirit. A clean shift felt like turning the page. Grooming here wasn't vanity, it was belonging. The message, you are tended. Scars told stories in a century that kept receipts in skin. A knife slip at harvest, a pox pit near the temple, a line on the jaw where a horse remembered you too hard. Faces didn't erase. They negotiated. Veils softened, beards reframed, bangs hid a crescent moon on the brow. Courtly appearance rules allowed certain edits, modesty cloth, strategic shadow, but prized honesty over spectacle. If a scar arrived with courage, people saw it before they saw you, and relaxed. Age entered like a winter guest who brought wisdom and colder hands. Hair thinned, silvered. Joints voiced opinions on stairs. Eyes preferred wider letters and kinder candles. You adapted the silhouette. Looser sleeves that forgave swelling, softer colours that partnered with candlelight, a cap that flattered skull shape when braids retired. Under vanity versus virtue, maturity earned new cosmetics, rest, posture and timing. A steady voice made wrinkles look like margins where meaning lived. Teeth were weather vanes for fortune and time. Salt and sage powders kept courage, but loss happened, smiles narrowed. People smiled, with the eyes more placed kindness in the tilt of the head, let laughter arrive from the chest. Breath rinses, wine cut with water and a leaf of rosemary, kept conversation brave. Here image versus survival meant choosing warmth over perfection. An unafraid host reads lovelier than any enamel. Childbirth wrote epics in bodies that still had to fetch water. After long nights faces swelled, skin demanded gentler soap, hair asked for a simpler braid. Women borrowed the churching veil like a cloud that carried them through tenderness and scrutiny. A touch of alkanet kept worry from looking like illness. Linen against skin became armour. None of this was theatre. It was triage with elegance. Painful beauty rituals paused. Endurance took the mirror's chair. Illness changed sound before it changed shape. Voices went papery, huffs replaced laughs, sentences shortened. The etiquette of care was its own cosmetic. You spoke softer, warmed cups, opened a window 2 fingers, and never let the sick room smell like defeat. Rosemary near the door, beeswax candle, trimmed low. Floor swept so footsteps landed quietly. Maintenance became affection. Under medieval beauty standards, a well-kept sick room made everyone look braver. When pox or fever altered a face permanently, community adjusted its gaze. A veil lowered expectations. A beard redrafted the jaw. A hood claimed privacy without apology. Craftspeople learned angles, turned toward the window that forgives, Stand where the scar reads as shadow. Pain didn't need to be hidden. It needed to be staged kindly. That's courtly appearance rules at their best, not cruelty disguised as taste, but taste employed to shelter the wound. Men bargained with age through grooming that admitted mileage. Beards shifted from boast to boundary, hair shortened to let the skull look deliberate, scents moved from musk to herb because wisdom rarely shouts. A merchant with ink-blotted fingers and careful shoes could outshine a lacquered youth simply by keeping promises. Vanity versus virtue made peace with crow's feet when the eyes that owned them were honest. Rituals of consolation became the era's real cosmetics. Sharing broth before words, changing sheets before visitors, warming a comb and passing it slowly through hair that had forgotten compliments. You didn't polish a sick friend. You made the world less sharp. That care had a look, softer edges, simpler clothes, light that forgave. People called it piety. It was also design. Image versus survival, met in a room that allowed healing to keep its dignity. And then there were the days when time won loudly, limp cane, missing fingers, a face mapped by pox. Communities learned to arrange rooms so bodies could still enter them. Benches by warm walls, stairs with rails, tables lower to pardon shoulders. Beauty travelled from skin to space. You could feel it when someone walked in and the room had already decided to be kind. That kind of beauty ages infinitely well. Hold that frame as we step toward the people who professionalize these negotiations, barber surgeons, midwives, and herbalists. Craftsmen and women who stitched faces, calmed fevers, and invented the discreet tricks that let scars, age, and survival read as authority instead of apology. Ready to sit by the hearth while the barber unrolls his instruments, and the midwife opens her herb wallet, and see how medieval beauty standards were patched, mended, and sometimes mercifully reimagined. You find the barber surgeon's shop by the smell before the sign. Hot iron, clean linen, wine vinegar, and a patient sweetness of beeswax. His tools lie rolled like a knight's kit, razors thin as arguments, lancets that glint like warnings, needles curved to persuade torn skin back into grammar. He's half groomer, half mechanic, wholly necessary to everyday grooming in the Middle Ages, when weather and work write too boldly on the body. You sit, he studies, and the rune's hush says, "We will make you presentable to both God and market, without lying about what happened." Under medieval beauty standards, that's the real miracle. A haircut here is more than fashion. It's crisis management with manners. He trims where cowlicks rehearse rebellion, thins where helmets made weather, and oils a beard until it reads as judgment, rather than jaggedness. If a brow needs editing for a high forehead look, he uses thread and speed, minimizing the sting of those painful beauty rituals with a joke that lands exactly when the tear does. He won't promise marble. He will promise symmetry, which is how dignity first introduces itself. You leave brighter because edges have stopped shouting. Shaving is ceremony. The basin catches your reflection in trembling wine. The lather smells faintly of rosemary and lye. The razor's song is slow, practical poetry. The barber manages light, angle, and your pride keeping Nick and rumour from collaborating. A steady hand here becomes social armour. No distracted dabs of blood at vespers, no raw patches that invite questions you can't bill. It's image versus survival played at the speed of a blade. Then comes stitching the craft that makes tomorrow possible. Market slip, a workshop kiss from iron. He cleans with wine, powders with ground resin, and sutures with catgut, while your friend squeezes your hand and stares at a knot in the beam. His stitches are small, spaced like kindness, placed to make scars red as than warning. He teaches you to oil the line, so it heals flat and to face the window that forgives. Courtly appearance rules won't punish a scar, but they will punish neglect. He saves you from both. Cupping and bloodletting live here too, but the good barber treats them like salt. useful, sparing, never a meal. He prefers rest, broth, steam, and the scandalous cure called cancel, a quarrel. For swollen joints, he warms cloths until they smell like bread. For headaches, he trims hair at the nape and orders water, as if commanding troops. In a world tempted by shiny jars, his skepticism is beauty's best friend. Vanity versus virtue tilts toward virtue. When a craftsman refuses to sell theatre, cross the lane and find the midwife's house, its doorway hung with herbs like protective sentences. Her hands carry generations of passwords: how to turn a breech, how to steam a brow, how to make a bed into a boat that brings mother and child across. She keeps modest cosmetics for mercy, not display. A touch of alkanet so exhaustion won't be misread as illness. Lavender to quiet rooms that want hush. Under medieval beauty standards, she defends a woman's face from scandal the way she defends her body from fever. The midwife's grooming is pastoral care. She washes hair with warmed water after long labour, so the first mirror is kind. She blues a fresh linen so pale looks like peace. She straightens a veil to redirect gossip before it finds traction. She knows which neighbours praise radiance and mean virtue, which is why she stages both with soap and light. These aren't painful beauty rituals, they're gentlenesses that keep a hard day from becoming a long rumour. Her motto is simple: make recovery look respectable enough to be left alone. In her herb wallet live small stubborn mercies. Rosehip for fortitude, fennel for milk, comfrey for skin that needs persuasion to meet again. She brews barley water to reintroduce appetite, sage to argue with sore throats, and honey for wounds that need both sealing and a reason to behave. She warns against bright powders that promise miracles and cost months. She prefers slow solutions that smell like gardens, kitchens, and sleep. That's image versus survival done honestly. Heal first, then pretty. The herbalist, sometimes the midwife, sometimes a grey-eyed neighbour with a garden that expects visitors, teaches you the difference between scent and spell. Rosemary water frames cleanliness. Mint crowds out onions. Rue is for thresholds, not throats. She shows you how to make a salve that turns cracked knuckles into capable hands, and a rinse that convinces hair to lie down without confessing oil. She'll say beauty is what usefulness looks like under candlelight, and you'll believe her because your day gets easier when her jars enter it. Together, these three keepers, barber, surgeon, midwife, herbalist, form a quiet guild of prevention. They set calendars for washing and linen. They time haircuts before feast days. They stage public faces that won't collapse in private. They know that medieval beauty standards respond to rhythm more than spectacle, to rest more than paint, to clean air more than compliments. When they succeed, no one notices. When they fail, everyone does. That's the price of working backstage. They also maintain the ceasefire between vanity versus virtue. The barber refuses lead and paints with light instead. The midwife legitimizes small colour as courage. The herbalist edits perfume into grammar, not gossip. If law snarls, they answer with results. Fewer fevers, calmer rooms, faces that look like sleep and not sin. Authority, they've learned, comes from making mornings less complicated. Beauty is simply the side effect. Keep one more picture. Evening in the shop, shutters latched, tools drying like careful fish, and the three sharing bread while the village exhales its stories. They trade notes. Whose salve healed quickest, which lacing spared ribs, where the draught bullied the sick room, and tomorrow's solutions bloom in that modest conversation. If you're ready, we'll step into the mirror that judges even their work. The painter's studio and the poet's page, where portraits and romances harden fashion into myth and turn tidy into timeless. How did images lock living faces into rules, sometimes kind, sometimes cruel, that still haunt our glass? Walk into the painter's studio and the air tastes faintly of egg and metal. Gesso boards lean like blank promises. Shells of crushed pigment wait in a row. Lead white, like sifted flour. Vermilion, like a secret. Azurite, as calm as winter sky. A north window pours merciful light, the kind that forgives last night's sleep and today's nerves. The master tilts a panel and smiles. We'll give them your truest self, just the tidier version. Under medieval beauty standards, the brush doesn't invent, it edits. It takes what everyday grooming in the Middle Ages tries to accomplish each dawn and makes it permanent in gold leaf. Tempera is patient power. Egg yolk binds pigment, the way resolve. Binds habit, thin glazes blur pores into grace and turn a wind-chapped cheek into a candlelit one. High forehead. The underdrawing pushes the hairline back a whisper, honouring those courtly appearance rules without confessing tweezers. Mouth small, upper lip, pale eyes modestly wide. Conventions as steady as church bells. You swear you see likeness. What you're really seeing is obedience to a visual grammar that makes viewers relax. Patterns live here like family recipes. Cartoons, full-size drawings, are pinned, dusted with charcoal. Pounce so the same saint's eye or noble's brow can be repeated without argument. It's efficient, yes, but it also standardizes loveliness. When every panel solves faces, the same way, vanity versus virtue comes pre-installed. Humility in the lids, discipline in the mouth, serenity in the brow. A workshop style becomes a parish's taste, then a region's rulebook. Colour preaches as loudly as line. Mary's mantle glows ultramarine when patrons can afford oceans. Lesser blues do the job when coin runs thin. Vermilion warms lips, just enough to read. Alive, not loud. Gold leaf wraps sanctity and status in the same glittering grammar, turning proximity to God and proximity to money into similar halos. This is image versus survival, disguised as radiance pigment prices, trade routes, and rainy harvests, all hiding inside a portrait's calm. Patronage edits faces. Before paint. Does. A guildmaster wants a wife who looks devout and prosperous. Veil tidy, hands clean, ring catching light. A young lord wants jawline and lineage. A widow asks for truth softened by mercy. The master nods and chooses light, like a lawyer. Chooses words. Reality remains, scar muted, squint forgiven, the small asymmetry that says, human, but the picture sells steadiness, not weather. The painter is the barber surgeon of reputation. Now step into parchment. Lighter. The scriptorium hums like bees in winter. Vellum smells sweet and animal. Gilt letters wink like the first star. Illuminators paint women with skin, of ivory and milk. Brows thin as a bow. Hair the colour of ripe wheat, whether the village grows barley or not. Marginalia joke, but the main figures teach. Copy after copy. Medieval beauty standards harden like wax. What was one poet's metaphor becomes a generation's mirror. Poets lay down the law with music. Troubadours praise, foreheads high and clear, lips like cherries, hands whiter than linen in March sun. Romances tell you how love recognizes itself on a face before the first word is spoken. Preachers counter with exemplar, the painted woman who prized rouge over prayer and found both washed away by rain. Between them, vanity versus virtue becomes a duet you can stop hearing. Be luminous, but don't look like you tried. Courtly verse is choreography for behaviour. Lower the gaze, soften the step. Make your laughter brief. Instructions tucked into rhyme as if they were gifts, not guardrails. Men receive their share, hair trimmed. Breath herb-sweet gestures contain. Good looks, the poems insist, are manners wearing skin. You realize courtly appearance rules don't only regulate sleeves, they regulate sound, timing, even where your eyes choose to rest. What begins in art returns to bodies at dawn. A girl plucks a hairline because a panel-cinced brow looked like calm. A merchant's wife powders lightly so her face reads, rested the way the poet said it should. A barber trims beards toward the jawline, the master painted last winter. Everyday grooming in the Middle Ages becomes an imitation game, and the winners are those who can afford time, linen, and a little pigment. The poor play along with ingenuity, good light, clean hands, a braid that says orderly. Of course, portraits lie kindly while life tells jokes. Frost paints noses crimson smoke, gives eyes a permanent sermon. Chilblains turn hands into weather reports. Stanchion, image versus survival, hangs between panel and street like a doorway curtain. People learn to stage truth. Turn the scar to the window that forgives. Pick the veil that edits the day's fatigue. Borrow posture from the saint and patience from the cook. The workshop is a beauty factory with theology. Apprentices grind lead white, that women will later wear as paste. Boys lay gold that nobles will echo with cloth of gold sleeves. A patron gazes at her painted self until the living one must negotiate with the ideal across the room. Are these painful beauty rituals? Not with tweezers. This pain is subtler, the ache of measuring up to a picture you paid to make. And yet, the picture helps. People treat the painted calm as your baseline and give you daylight to match it. Images travel. Verses travel faster. Miniatures cross borders in jeweled lockets, spreading a workshop's correct complexion like a fashion plague. A lyric sung at a feast becomes a proverb in a byre. The village absorbs both and calls them common sense. Centuries later, we still inherit the silhouette. High brow, pale cheek, modest mouth, a serenity you could file taxes on. If you've ever used a filter to look more like yourself, you've spoken fluent medieval. Which brings us to the machinery behind the image. Merchants selling azurite by the ounce and saffron by the thread. Dyers guarding recipes like relics. Peddlers hawking mirrors, combs and honest powders at market gates. To see how beauty left the studio and entered the street as inventory, we've got to open the guild ledgers and the spice chests, count coins, sniff fraud, and follow the caravan dust that settled into lips and sleeves. Ready to meet the market, where ideals become items and every purchase votes for a face. Open the shutters on market morning, and you'll hear beauty before you see it. Spices sneezing from sacks, dyers' vats gossiping in colour, a grinder's wheel singing like a wasp. This is the supply side of medieval beauty standards. Pigments by the ounce, herbs by the handful, cloth by the ell, and 100 hands turning wish into stock. Between the painter's promise and the parish's judgment stands a ledger. If you want to know why faces looked the way they did, count what the caravans actually brought and what the guilds were willing to certify. Start with colour, the most expensive rumour. Azurite arrives in knotted cloth packets, gritty as riverbed, heavy as a favour. Vermilion comes like crystallized fire. Madder root stains fingernails for a week, just from saying hello. Honest merchants tap a flake on a hot iron to prove it smells right. Cheats bulk powders with chalk that tastes like boredom. Dyers' guilds guard recipes like relics. Alum here, urine there, tannins timed to the quarter hour. If a gown glows under candlelight, it's because 10 people kept secrets and 20 obeyed clocks. That's image versus survival translated into procurement. Spices do double duty as pharmacy and perfume. Saffron writes sunlight into rice and hair rinses. Cloves sweeten breath and receipts. Cinnamon puts feast day inside a room when the sky refuses. Apothecaries measure with brass weights, the size of thimbles, then press wax seals into paper packets as if they were micro-treaties. Prices dance with weather and war. 3 storms in the straits, and your winter radiance becomes a summer plan. Even everyday grooming in the Middle Ages depends on ships you'll never see. Mirror peddlers work the liminal spaces. Fairs bridges, city gates, hawking polished bronze, the occasional sliver of Venetian glass, and a patter that flatters at arm's length. They sell honesty with a haze, enough clarity to fix a veil, not enough to start an argument with pause. A good mirror is a portable editor, a bad one is a folk tale about vanity. You learn to angle toward the sun, breathe on the surface, and accept that the reflection is a suggestion, not a verdict. Vanity versus virtue lives right there in the gleam. Barber surgeons and bathhouse keepers buy in bulk and become tastemakers by accident. One chooses rosemary over musk because the city's air is already crowded. Another stocks alkanet root because his clients leave looking merely rested, not painted. A single shop's purchasing habits ripple through a ward, then a parish. When people compliment glow, they're saluting a vendor's restraint as much as a customer's routine. That's the quiet governance beneath courtly appearance rules. Supply chains disciplining fashion. Counterfeit thrives wherever desire outruns coin. Venetian ceruse cut with chalk. Ambergris that's whale oil with delusions. Sandalwood that's any wood with a poet. The guilds fight back with marks, punched into metal, stitched into selvages, inked onto paper tags, and with dawn raids on stalls that smell wrong. Even so, bargains seduce. A cheap scent shouts through a feast. A fugitive dye bleeds onto wrists like gossip. Markets teach hard lessons. If the price is unbelievable, so will your face be by noon. Counterfeit thrives wherever desire outruns coin. Venetian ceruse cut with chalk. Ambergris, that's whale oil with delusions. Sandalwood, that's any wood with a poet. The guilds fight back with marks, punched into metal, stitched into selvages, inked onto paper tags, and with dawn raids on stalls that smell wrong. Even so, bargains seduce. A cheap scent shouts through a feast. A fugitive dye bleeds onto wrists like gossip. Markets teach hard lessons. If the price is unbelievable, so will your face be by noon. Cloth merchants are choreographers of silhouette. They know which weaves forgive kitchen smoke, which wools don't itch, which linen grades make, clean by change, feel like grace, not penance. They'll steer thrifty buyer to russet that glows near firelight, and a bold one to leaf green that survives rain with dignity. In the arithmetic of image versus survival, one well-chosen L beats 3 capricious yards every time. Tailors and merchants whisper about clients the way millers whisper about grain, not cruelly, just professionally. Moneylenders and pawnbrokers sit in the wings, financing beauties, season tickets. A small loan buys a wedding veil that becomes a dowry that becomes a story. The village never stops retelling. Forfeited brooch reappears on a guildmaster's wife at Candlemas, and suddenly vanity versus virtue acquires a subplot about interest rates. You begin to see that taste rides on credit as much as on catechism, and that modesty is sometimes the courage to say, not this year. Monastic houses complicate the market in interesting ways. Gardens behind walls grow rosemary, sage and roses at industrial kindness. Still rooms drip hydrosols into bottles that smell like prayer. Some abbeys sell excess openly, others trade in hush. An apothecary jar here, a sachet there, a whispered exchange through a grill. Irony. The same church that scolds about rouge often bankrolls the gentlest skin soothers. Supply out Argy's sermon, when the winter wind writes in chapped italics. Roots make taste provincial. A North Sea port smells of tar and cheap pitch. Perfumes run herbal and brisk. A Mediterranean city hums with raisins and citrus. Linen dries faster, and powders dare more, because sweat forgives. Border towns filter fashion through customs men with noses. Inland fairs run on what survived oxen, mud, and negotiation. If you've ever wondered why medieval beauty standards look regional, map caravans before you map cheekbones. Geography puts its thumb on the scale. Haggling is theatre that trains the tongue. You learn to praise quality before naming price, to ask for the guild mark without sounding like insult, to accept a substitution only if your nose and your calendar both agree. Good bargain leaves the merchant smiling, and your conscience light. A bad one buys a headache disguised as civet. Etiquette, those courtly appearance rules for money, keeps faces from turning into ledgers with resentment entries. People remember how you bought as much as what you wore. Finally, markets mint myths as fast as coins. A new dye, blessed by a saint. A comb, carved from unicorn bone. A face water, used by queens. You smile, weigh the bottle, and ask for the recipe. Wisdom is the cheapest luxury here. Buy linen before legends, rosemary before musk, light before paint. And yet, the spectacle has its uses. Festivals need sparkle, portraits need theatre, so the savvy shopper builds a kit that can do both Sunday and Tuesday, which is where we're headed next. The high-wire active display, tournaments, receptions, pageants, where bodies must survive armour, dust, and applause without abandoning grace. Ready to watch beauty ride a horse. Picture the tourney field at noon. Banners whip, trumpets nip the air, horses blow steam like kettles, and the crowd is a living tapestry. Wool, linen, fur, and 1,000 hopes. Sun bounces off helms like thrown coins. Dust climbs every sentence and edits it. If you're going to be beautiful here, you must outsmart physics. That's the honest edge of image versus survival. Keep your breath, keep your balance, keep your temper, and the face will follow. In the squire's tent, grooming becomes logistics. Knight's beard gets oiled just enough to read disciplined, not perfumed. Hair is tied low so the helmet's padding doesn't soar at the skull. Cheeks get a touch of powder to stop chafing where steel will argue with skin. No rouge. Sweat will supply that. A barber checks nails. Grip, heels, stirrups, and breath talk to the herald, not haunt him. Everyday grooming in the Middle Ages isn't dainty here. It's engineering for impact. Armour has a scent. Iron, leather, tallow, morning. And it competes with horse. Caparisons are brushed till they shine like language. Manes are combed and ribboned if the purse allows. Hooves are greased so mud doesn't write your biography at the first puddle. A knight who tends his mount reads handsomer before the visor ever lifts. Under medieval beauty standards, good husbandry is a mirror with hooves. In the stands, veils learn meteorology. Ladies angle wimples against glare, tuck a lemon or mint in the pouch to rescue breath after cheering, and pin ribbons so wind can't turn modesty into slapstick. Linen undergowns drink sweat. Sleeves that are glorious at vespers get hitched for dust. Courtly appearance rules apply at altitude. Gesture small, cheer warm, don't let silk fight the weather on your behalf. The best-looking spectator is the one who never fidgets. Dowd. Colour management is half the show. Heralds wear the grammar of the day. Azure that forgives dust, madder that forgives wine, gold that forgives nothing, and therefore demands perfection. Pages wet their hair so cowlicks behave. A thin dab of ash on a sweaty brow cuts shine when the sun gets personal. Tiny tricks, big dividends. Vanity versus virtue finds a truce. Presentable enough to honour the moment, restrained enough to honour the sky. Backstage, shade is currency. A strip of canvas buys stamina. A basin buys a second wind. A fresh shift buys civility. Men wring out linen like confessions. Women swap sleeves and partlets to reset the silhouette without breaking a statute or a budget. If glory's public, recovery's private, and both smell like rosemary water. This is image versus survival at field speed. Cleanliness as pit stop, not spa day. Then comes the token, the favour tied to a crest or wrist. It looks romantic and feels like an engineering test. Will the ribbon cut circulation under gauntlet leather? or the brooch snag on reins exactly when the horse decides to contribute its opinion. A smart lady chooses light and smooth. A smart knight secures it where pride can't become pain. If there are painful beauty rituals today, they're tight laces and tighter shoes in heat, and everyone learns the cost curve by mid-afternoon. The clash ends. Bruises begin. Barber surgeons rinse dust with wine, set noses that tried to exit the conversation, and smooth raw cheeks with goose fat cut by rosemary. Knights learn the banquet repair. A wipe, a comb, a cooler shirt, a steadying draft. Ladies do the gallery reset. Wash hands and face, re-pin veil light and scent. So stew doesn't taste like civet. Everyday grooming in the Middle Ages is a relay. Field to tent to hall, with dignity as the baton. Processions shift the arena from dirt to stone. Streets scatter flowers and sawdust. Incense drifts. Bells teach feet to keep time. Faces must read orderly from balconies and doorways. You manage shine with linen, breath with mint, stride with humility. Children run beside, narrating. Widows watch from windows. A bishop's hand blesses the dust into something like choreography. Under courtly appearance rules, beauty equals predictability that still feels alive. Pageants are allegory with elbows. Virtue in pale blue rides a cart. A fortune in brighter silk spins a wheel. A city in green smiles with tax-funded confidence. Paint is light. Gesture carries more weight than colour. The trick is to look emblematic without tipping into parody. Vanity versus virtue gets staged into a fable the crowd can understand at 20 paces. Modest eyes, clear posture, sleeves that don't argue with ladders. Evening receptions are where the day's lies and truths settle. Candlelight forgives, steam conspires, and kitchens compose aromas that should never dual perfume. You stand where air moves kindly, face the window. Not the rumour drink water between boasts. Compliments land first. Quarrels wait for daylight. Beauty at supper is mostly restraint. Salt the stew, not the story. If the hall calls you radiant, it's because you didn't make other people work to endure you. When the torch is gutter and the square is a memory, the morning after begins. Laundry with opinions, salves for pride, and the quiet accounting of what the spectacle cost. Blisters bent pins, a ribbon lost to a heroic gust. That's where we're headed next. Confessionals and council benches, sermons and statutes. The moral audit of appearance. How did preachers, magistrates, and house ordinances judge the line between display and disorder? Ready to hear how the century priced glory when the drums stopped. Walk into a town where the bell decides your day, and you'll find two courts judging your reflection. The priest's wooden box that smells of wax and breath mints, and the council chamber that smells of damp wool and ink. Between them sits the household, its own little senate of stewards, aunts, and ordinances. Here, beauty is cross-examined. A face can be well kept or tempting trouble. A gown can be festive or fineable. Under medieval beauty standards, loveliness isn't private. It's a public utility with bylaws, fees, and the occasional sermon shaped like a thundercloud. From the pulpit, preachers loved a tidy paradox. Cleanliness honours the Creator. Conceit steals his credit. They told brisk little exemplar about women who painted cheeks and watched the rain unmask them, or men whose scented gloves made the poor hungry. But the same sermons praised order, fresh linen, modest veils, hands that didn't smell like yesterday's fish. That's the old duet of vanity versus virtue. Glow as if given, not grabbed. You're coached to aim for candlelit calm, not carnival sparkle, and to let kindness, not coal, be the first thing people notice. City statutes gave the paradox teeth. Sumptuary lists named which furs were for whom, how wide sleeves might wander, what colours could attend a wedding without making magistrates twitch. A beadle with a pen could turn a hem into a bill. Most days, enforcement felt like theatre. Warnings first, fines later. But markets learned the choreography. Trim a ribbon, shorten a point. Swap velvet for good wool that behaves in rain. Courtly appearance rules weren't only courtly. They patrolled bridges, bakehouses, and feast queues with equal enthusiasm. Then there were house ordinances, the quiet constitution behind every polished morning. The steward pinned rules near the pantry. Windows, 2 fingers at dawn, vinegar water on market eves. Incense, never more than 1 comb unless plague speaks first. Linen cycles were sacred. Perfume was rationed like rhetoric. Clean threshold wasn't just pride, it was policy that kept rumour from breeding. In these rooms, image versus survival stopped bickering and shook hands. Elegance would be achieved through habit, not heroics. Confession shaped faces more than rouge ever did. In Lent, the priest asked, not only what touched your lips, but what touched your skin. Were you masking fatigue with lies in a jar? Did your ribbon shout money you didn't have? Penances sometimes arrived as grooming edits, simpler veils, fewer pins, a promise to trade sent for alms until Easter. Yet, the same priest would quietly bless a dab of alkanet on a new mother's mouth. So compassion didn't read as illness. Even inside the box, every day, grooming in the Middle Ages was triaged with a conscience. Guild bylaws kept beauty's merchants honest, or tried to. Barbers swore to sharp razors and clean basins. Apothecaries logged ingredients and avoided poisons that flattered before they punished. Bathkeepers posted hours that respected fast days and fever rumours. A barber who refused laid powder performed theology with his strop. An apothecary who watered rose water with prayer, not ditch, saved whole neighbourhoods from headaches. Regulation wasn't glamorous, but it quietly rewrote cheeks and tempers. Women's councils, formal, where charters allowed, informal everywhere, enforced the border between tasteful and taunting. A godmother tugged a neckline higher, with 2 fingers and a look that saved you a month of gossip. An aunt taught you to blue linen, so clean, didn't require a tub in January. A midwife arrived with rosemary and respect when grief made faces brittle. These domestic tribunals kept painful beauty rituals from turning reckless and turned care into a neighbourhood asset. Men got policed too, just with different nouns. A council might ban scented gloves at funerals or require short beards during plague months when masks and mercy had to coexist. Barbers learned the tone of a magistrate's face. Trim the swagger, soften the jaw, leave enough dignity to pass inspection at matins. A peacocky shoe could still earn a fine if it tripped you in a procession. Nothing is less handsome than a man who makes a civic ritual stumble. Civic piety staged its own audits in public air. Rogation days wound through fields with banners. Participants washed hands, softened breath with mint, and wore colours that didn't outshine the sky. During stink seasons, processions shortened, incense thinned, and linens doubled. The proclamation was practical poetry. Let humility be our perfume. Here, image versus survival wrote law in a language everyone could smell. Paperwork backed the vibe. Stewards kept accident books where spills, scalds, and scent mishaps earned solutions and dates. Less frankincense in the south transept. Blew the well water on market eaves. Thanked the laundresses publicly. When pamphleteers mocked, painted virtue, the household replied with ledgers and tours. Come see the wash, the vinegar balls, the window rule. Bureaucracy made the prettiest rebuttals. Competence with receipts. Then there were edge zones. Actors, minstrels, sex workers. Lives where excess was both uniform and hazard. Authorities fenced them with licenses and lanes, tolerating theatre while quarantining scandal. Paint that shouted in church, read as costume on stage. Call that meant sin in one alley meant role in another. Medieval beauty standards flexed more than they admit. Place and hour could redeem or indict the same face. All this scrutiny bred creativity. People learned to read rooms, to pace scent, to let linen carry half the load and posture the rest. They hacked rules with elegance. A ribbon moved one finger, a veil shifted shade, a comb run through hair at a window that forgave. And when doors latched, a different standard took over. The private theatre where affection, not policy, decided what was beautiful. That's where we're heading next. Bedchambers and love letters, tokens and night rituals, how beauty behaved when the audience was one. And the rules were whispered rather than posted. A bedchamber at night is a different country. The corridor's politics stop at the latch. Candle wax breathes a soft honeyed note, and the rushes settle into a hush that feels like complicity. Here, medieval beauty standards loosen their laces. The performance slows but never quite ends. You still manage light, scent, and sound. Only now, the goal is comfort over spectacle, truth over theatre. Think of it as a treaty between image versus survival, where both sides promise to whisper. Water is warmed because skin listens better when heat is kind. A copper basin fogs. You wring a linen until it sighs. Rose water and a breath of vinegar persuade the day to let go. You clean the obvious, forehead, corners of eyes, the hinge of the jaw where talk gathered, the hands that shook, sliced, carried. This is everyday grooming in the Middle Ages, at its most intimate, not to impress the hall, but to let sleep find you without tripping over soot and salt. Linen does the heavy lifting of tenderness. A fresh chemise is pulled like a quiet curtain between you and the day. Sheets, if fortune smiles, smell faintly of lavender or juniper smoke. A small sachet in the pillow tells a bedtime story the body understands. You don't flood the room with perfume, you frame it. A pulse point, a hem, the inside of a cuff. Court noses forgive honesty, but in this room the only nose that matters wants clarity, not fireworks. The old duet of vanity versus virtue becomes a waltz you can actually dance. Pins come out like truce flags. A veil relinquishes the brow. Braids loosen, the scalp exhales. You've kept a high hairline. Those old painful beauty rituals finally get their apology. All along the edges, a warmed comb, fingers that know where nerves live. It's practical mercy and also symbolic. The mind steps forward when the costume steps back. The room reads you without captions, and you read yourself more kindly than the mirror ever will. Breath gets its own liturgy. A twig of licorice, a pinch of mint, a clove tucked in the cheek until it stops auditioning and starts helping. Rinse, wine cut with water, and a sage leaf, then a promise to keep onions a day away from secrets. In public etiquette kept conversation pretty. In private, courtesy keeps closeness gentle. Courtly appearance rules. Never mention kisses, but everyone knows the rule. Clean first, claim second. Tokens travel to the threshold between story and secret. A ribbon from a sleeve, a ring warmed by skin, a pomander unscrewed to reveal halves that match. One kept, one carried. You choose light scents that won't stain memory into headache. You hide stitches where a knowing eye might smile, but not preach. Gifts here don't shout status, they anchor presence. Under medieval beauty standards, the most persuasive ornament is evidence of attention. Letters are a kind of grooming for the future. You sand the ink until it stops shining. You seal with wax that remembers your thumb. Perhaps you brush the paper once through a rosemary draft so the message arrives speaking softly. Handwriting carries posture. Choices of title and blessing carry breath. The messenger learns discretion. The reader learns to fold the sheet so your words release like scent, not smoke. In this economy of feeling, image versus survival becomes hope versus caution, and both matter. Morning after is its own craft. You don't want a face that announces news to the corridor. You want one that says, slept. A cool cloth wakes the eyes. A braid regains its discipline. The veil is repinned a finger lower to read serene, not smug. Linen changes, bed's ed window 2 fingers. Rumour hates ventilation. If anyone compliments your calm, thank the basin, not the saints. That everyday grooming in the Middle Ages doing quiet statecraft. Boundaries protect both tenderness and reputation. The latch gets checked. The fire is banked so it warms, not tells. Shoes are set where they want tattle to ash. A love that survives the hall knows how to outsmart floorboards and timing, and how to leave a chamber smelling like sleep instead of story. Even here, courtly appearance rules have a job. Save passion from paperwork. Sleep itself is a cosmetic the century respected but couldn't always afford. You game it with warm feet, an extra fold at the window to bully drafts, and a small bolster to keep the neck from writing curses in the morning. Swollen eyes announce failure at dawn. A measured night announces competence. The loveliest faces in any age are often just the ones allowed to rest. Class changes the props, not the principles. Cottage grants 1 candle and a basin by the hearth. A manor offers screens, a copper tub, a chest where herbs winter well. In both the choreography is the same. Unmake the day, remake the human. Let the room cool pride and warm pulse. Medieval beauty standards can be punishing at noon. At midnight, they soften into simple decency. Be clean, be kind, be quiet. Keep this picture as we close the door. A letter cooling under wax. A ribbon sleeping in a book. A comb resting like a little oar beside a still sea. The world will ask for spectacle again at dawn. But before the bell starts judging, there's one last theatre to study. The aesthetics of grief and penance. Ash on the brow, black cloth that edits faces, and the strange consoling beauty of restraint when the village wears sorrow together. Shall we step into mourning and watch how tenderness became the final standard? No mirror could command. Morning begins at the threshold, where sound itself puts on quieter shoes. Candles burn lower, shutters crowd the light into smaller rooms. The floor is swept as if tidiness could translate into mercy. Under medieval beauty standards, grief had a look on purpose. Colours that refused misinterpretation, silhouettes that slowed conversation, faces staged to keep neighbours kind. A village can help you mourn, but only if it can read you at 20 paces. Clothing writes the first sentence, so the heart doesn't have to shout. Black, grey, and unblued white do most of the speaking. Ruffle weaves replace sheen, ribbons go on pilgrimage, metal quiets down to iron and pewter. A widow's veil sits lower on the brow, so eyes need less explaining. A man's belt loses ornament and gains inches of humility. This isn't theatre for its own sake. It's wayfinding. Courtly appearance rules make sorrow legible, so bakers bring bread and magistrates bring patience before words arrive. The fabric carries the news, so the body can carry the day. Grooming edits itself to honesty. Hair is braided, plain and covered, not sculpted. Scent becomes rosemary or nothing. Hands are clean, not polished. You practice everyday grooming in the Middle Ages at its gentlest setting. Water warmed, linen wrung softly, a comb that moves like prayer. The aim isn't loveliness, it's steadiness. Face the window that forgives touch. The pulse points only with cool water, and let skin speak. Woke at dawn, did what must be done. Fasting changes, colour before it changes ribs. Lips lose their usual cheer. A dab of alkanet might stay in the chest, unopened because vanity versus virtue has new borders tonight. Parish custom lets a new mother keep a whisper of bloom. A widow in her first month does not. Eyes rimmed in sleepless salt. Need mercy, not paint. Rosewater for sting. A cool rag for truth. Beauty here is restraint that doesn't punish. It's a face that asks the room to behave. Ash Wednesday teaches the grammar of dust. A priest's thumb draws a charcoal cross exactly where your mirror usually begins its work. No powder today, only acknowledgement. The mark reframes the whole head. Veils sit differently. Glances land lower. Voices learn indoor volume by instinct. Even the skeptical feel its design sense, a single dark sign that tells strangers to soften their sentences. Image versus survival finds peace in this mark. It buys you room to heal. Household ordinances bend toward quiet. Windows to fingers to keep air honest. Incense trimmed to a thread or set aside. Cooking done earlier so evening can belong to stories and silence. The stew smells like time, not triumph. Linen changes more often, because tears are salty and grief is work. The steward's list, so helpful during feasts. Now protect tenderness. Fewer visitors per hour, longer walks in gardens, the good chair near the warm wall. Elegance becomes protection. Penance has its wardrobe too. Coarse shirts scrape pride back into proportions. Hairlines stop their ambitious plucking. Perfumes become kitchen. Citrus, herb, clean bread air. These are painful beauty rituals with a different motive. Not to impress, but to remember. A scratchy seam at the neck edits posture. Bare hands remind you how the day actually feels. When you lift your head, it reads as humility instead of hunger for applause. Funerals rewrite movement into choreography of care. Pallbearers pace like sentence marks. Mourners follow with steps that don't argue with stone. Gloves stay off when earth meets wood, because skin to earth is the last honest touch. Faces point toward the ground only until prayers lift them. Breath keeps time with bells. If there is any courtly appearance rules left today, it's the rule that beauty is what doesn't make other people's grief heavier. Scars of grief become long-term costume notes. After the first hard weeks, colours tip from charcoal to brown, then to the familiar palette, but trims stay modest, and veils keep their lower habit for a season. Hair returns to gentler pins. Mirrors return to truth. Scent returns as herb, not musk. The transition itself is a public poem. I still carry absence, but I can carry work again too. Neighbours read it and adjust their questions. Memory has props. A ring on a ribbon tucked under the chemise, a locket with a strand of hair that nobody sees, a folded prayer in the work purse next to the key. These items don't broadcast. They ballast. They keep hands steady during market bargaining and keep the mouth kind when the day tests it. If medieval beauty standards ever earned your respect, it's here. Design that makes kindness easier on days when nothing is easy. Communal grief turns restraint into architecture. Processions shorten. Market music softens inn's dim lamps to the warm end of amber. Even jokes get edited into smaller fonts. The whole town performs a clean, dignified face, so the few who are shattered don't feel clumsy inside it. That's image versus survival at civic scale, staging comfort so real comfort has a chance. When the year finally turns, when feast days return with colour, and bells sound like courage again, a last ritual happens at the mirror. A ribbon reappears, a veil sits a finger higher, a dab of herb water admits spring. You are not beautiful because you hid your sorrow. You are beautiful because your choices kept everyone else hands free to help. With that, we've walked the whole arc, from flirtation to fasting, bathhouse to black cloth, and the stage is set for our opening promise. If the Middle Ages taught us anything, it's that beauty wasn't vanity, it was logistics. Every effortless face hid a schedule, linen swapped on time, windows cracked 2 fingers, rosemary when rooms forgot their manners. Medieval beauty standards lived where breath met habit, less about glamour, more about governance. When you see the high brow, the calm mouth, the modest gaze, you're really seeing 1,000 tiny choices that kept a life moving forward in rough weather. We walked the whole road, The travel box with combs and pins, bathhouses humming like bread ovens, lacing that lifted posture without stealing breath, hands and feet that testified before introductions, portrait studios that froze taste into rule, guild stalls where ideals turned into inventory, tournaments that tested grace under dust, and the statutes, sermons, and house rules. Along the way, vanity versus virtue kept arguing, and the wisest people turned the argument into rhythm. Under the paint and poetry, you met the cost. The painful beauty rituals, plucked hairlines, quicklime mishaps, lead white lies, weren't cartoons of foolishness. They were gambles in a world that prized readable faces. And yet the kindest tricks lasted. Gentle light over heavy powder, clean linen over hot baths, scent as a frame instead of a shout, posture that promised you wouldn't spill soup or secret. That's the quiet code of everyday grooming in the Middle Ages. Make yourself easy to stand beside. Maybe that's the real moral of courtly appearance rules. They were less about impressing strangers and more about lowering the room's blood pressure. Beauty worked when it made the day smoother, when shoes didn't clatter, breath didn't bully, sleeves didn't baptize soup, and gestures told the truth kindly. It wasn't perfection. It was stewardship. The crown, whether literal or not, stayed on because the routine held. So let me hand the mirror back to you. Which one habit would change your mornings right now? Opening a window, 2 fingers, a clean cloth at the ready, a calmer voice that dresses the room before you do. Which rule from this world do you still feel today? Sumptuary laws turned into dress codes, filters turned into portraits, clean by change, turned into the one shirt that saves your mood. And which ritual surprised you enough to try it once? Parsley as treaty, vinegar as reset, rosemary as honesty. If this journey gave you both goosebumps and gear, if it helped you see image versus survival as a negotiation you can win, share the episode with someone who equates effortless with luck. Tell them what the laundresses, barbers, midwives, and stewards already knew. Grace is engineered. And kindness, that's the most attractive thing any century has ever measured. I'd love to hear from you. What single practice will you borrow this week? Which myth cracked open for you, and what truth slipped out? What modern beauty rule now looks suspicious in your own life? If this felt less like a video and more like a work, a map you'll keep, tap like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next deep dive. Drop a comment with your favorite insight or a family ritual that suddenly makes historical sense. Until then, keep your window 2 fingers open, your linen honest, and your presence, the kind that makes rooms breathe easier.